welcome to the Eden Technologies podcast. My name is Mark Nonikovic. I'm a product lead designer by Eden Technologies. I'm very happy to be joined today by Tess Skirm from IDTechEx. Hi, Tess.
Hi, great to be here.
Thanks very much for coming on. Really interesting to get your perspective today. As a background where we're doing a lot of wearable technology, brain computer interface design at Eden Technologies, and you're quite an expert in what's actually happening in the world outside of our little company and the industry. So very happy to talk to you today, get your feedback on what's happening. Quick, how'd you come to the place you are right now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my background is I started out as an engineer. So I did an engineering degree, and I found that my passion in that subject, as much as I was originally studying aerospace, was actually really in the sensor technology side of engineering. So developed a real interest in sensor technology that led me to carry on and do a master's in that topic at Cambridge, where I'm still am now. Did a PhD there that was actually in the quantum sensing space, which was fantastic and very interesting. But I felt that really my heart was still in the broader sensor space and kind of engineering in general. So then that's when I found myself with IDTechEx and just cover a whole range of emerging technologies within the sensor space, including wearable technologies and quantum technologies. So kind of broad and diverse, but with a sensor theme is an overview for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we're really going from, let's say, more of these traditional IMU motion-based sensors, heart rate sensors, to really more exotic things like the quantum verse. Like, how do you draw the line between some of these sensor technologies? When you really talk about quantum, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, segmenting technologies within the sensor space can be challenging as it is, and that's actually a big part of my role is coming up with, useful ways to segment the space. When it comes to kind of the classical space and the quantum space, actually we spend time thinking about is the operating principle of this sensor dependent on quantum physics and quantum phenomena, or is it actually, as much as it's obviously still having effects contributed to by the quantum world, is the operating principle ultimately classical? So yeah, that's a big part of what we do, is thinking about that, and then also kind of thinking about when we classify, is something an incumbent or is it emerging? I mean, it's slightly unrelated to wearables and so on, but we can think about, is there an emerging market for this sensor type? Okay, it may technically be operating on a quantum principle, but you could say that of sensors that go within kind of, hard drives. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a brand new emerging space. So trying to really pick out the innovations that have got disruptive potential really is another important role of what we're doing.
Yeah, it seems like things are becoming quite ubiquitous with sensors, smartwatches. We have like a ton of data which is collected, generated day by day, but I'm not sure if we're actually making use of it just yet.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it comes down to, is the sensor data giving us something that we actually value and that we don't already know? So particularly within the kind of the brain interfacing space and kind of the related brain imaging space, you really see that it's kind of what data are we getting with this new type of sensor hardware, and what is the use case for it that we don't already have? Is it that magnetic field information is complementing an MRI scan in a way that gives us greater insight, or is it that the spatial resolution we're getting with this type of sensor is adding something? But kind of connecting that science and some of kind of the hardcore science of that to, so what does that mean for the market? Where is that added value going to translate into new users, new applications?
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to, let's say, these different categories for sensors, I mean, we have classic smartwatch, smart patches. I mean, they've been talked about for quite a while, and now finally, like having a glucose
Mm,
patch going in your body is pretty straightforward. So kind of think about these like very consumer-based wellness sensors
mhm.
that are actually like medical devices, quasi-medical devices.
Yeah.
How do you see the landscape right now for like all these differentiating sensors coming on the market?
Yeah. So it obviously with segmentation, you can split those up by the form factor that we're wearing them in, the wrist, the skin patch, the hearable, or into what metric are we trying to sense, or indeed what sensor type are we using to get at it. And there are kind of trends across those three spaces that are kind of slightly different. But if we take the wrist as the example, so obviously wrist worn sensing and biometric data, from the wrist is something that's hugely popular inherently because of the form factor it comes in. People have been wearing watches for hundreds of years. They're happy wearing a watch. There's no social barrier to wearing a watch.
Mm,
And it's easy then to adopt into your life. And a big part of the value proposition of wearables is that you can wear it all the time and it makes it easier to get at the data. So the watch
mm,
is just, and the wrist is a great fit for that. However, on the flip side, what you can get non-invasively at the wrist doesn't necessarily compare to what you can get at other places on the body and with these other form factors. So, non-invasive glucose monitoring at the wrist has been the holy grail for a long time. People would love to be able to do that. People are regularly finding that that's very, very, very difficult to do. And actually, if what you're trying to provide is convenient access to glucose data, then actually a minimally invasive or skin patch is suitable. So therefore, all of a
mm,
sudden, there's the diabetes market has been disrupted hugely with CGM patches.
mm,
Um, and then what you find with those two is an example that you brought up. At the wrist, it's kind of going, okay, well, what else can we do at the wrist that's going to add value? It might not be as a medical device. It might be that doing glucose monitoring, we're not going to get at that. But what can we do? Can we do blood pressure? Can we do more accurate motion sensing to work out exactly what activity type you're doing?
mm,
Can we put the sensors in there that help me navigate, a building inside and go up and down a flight of stairs?
mm,
But it's becoming less. Blood pressure aside, this thing of the future of health is going to be at your wrist it has slightly faded, and
mm,
that narrative is for me going more towards these other form factors like the skin patch, where it's like, oh, well, actually, when we've got access to stuff that's not non-invasive, we can get other metrics out. We can get glucose now. Okay, how can we adapt that? How can we get at lactose, ketone, pH?
mm,
Perhaps the other things that people are looking at. Um, but then the challenge there is that a lot of those metrics are more suited to perhaps one might argue the wellness market as opposed to the
mm,
medical market. So what is the challenge with both is what is the value that we can add? What functions can we add that then the consumer will be persuaded to go and to go and adopt it?
mm,
Kind of would there be a consumer market for smart patches, for example? Well, it depends what you're going to be able to tell me, because as a diabetic, I might be more than happy to adopt a skin patch because the value for me is so high. And maybe for some athletes, lactose monitoring, yeah, I want that information. But beyond that, am I going to really be persuaded to put a small needle into my arm just to get some data that's, not as crucial to my kind of survival or career?
mm,
And then, yeah, similarly with the wrist, it becomes, okay, maybe I can get some more medical type stuff at my wrist and it's easier. But if it's not quite as accurate as what I'm doing before, then I'm going to be too worried that I'm going to miss something. So, yeah, there's, and that's just, a selection of the battlegrounds that are kind of going on right now. So, yeah,
mm.
it's just an ongoing battle between value add and kind of the consumer drive to adopt it, and that is a real mix of, does the form factor suit the demographic, and does the sensor technology give valuable enough information?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting with as you say, the form factor, because oftentimes you have a lot of concepts, either from science fiction or just from sensor tech in general, where
Mm,
we say, oh, we want to have our fibers integrated with stretchable sensors all throughout the body, and we're going to do like three-dimensional monitoring of the body and everything. But then you actually start to build a smart shirt, and you realize, number one, it's still quite difficult to do. I
Mm,
mean, even with sensor arrays, like bringing batteries together, even if you talk about like wearable batteries that are maybe recharging themselves from your body heat or
mm.
motion over time. So the idea that fashion is still actually driving the function of sensors by just what we accept in society is still really interesting. I mean, we saw that also with like augmented reality smart glasses,
Mm.
like Google Glass, but also people who are doing their own AR devices and then getting societal pushback, sometimes getting assaulted because they look different. People were scared of the technology they were bringing into the personal space.
Yeah, it's an interesting one twofold. I mean, it's interesting that you kind of bring up sci-fi. I've just been putting an article together that essentially saying that in many ways sci-fi promised us quite a lot, and we haven't really got it yet.
Mm.
So we were promised hoverboards and holograms and all this cool stuff, and actually we have maybe a phone that we have a mixed relationship with, and we get stressed about battery life and kind of where is all the cool stuff. But actually I think in many ways as well, though, sci-fi missed some of what we've got going on now, and actually particularly with when I think about kind of hearables and headsets, when you see sci-fi depictions of kind of brain interfacing, it's all implanted chips. That's how it's being done.
Mm.
It's the supervillain has an implanted chip, and that's how he controls his Dr. Octopus suit or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see you don't see very much non-invasive brain computer interfacing in the movies. Like, it's not
Yeah.
particularly glamorous, or it's not historically been kind of cool or sought after. But for me, that kind of means then it's kind of a little bit more open in terms of what can be made socially acceptable to adopt,
Mm-hmm.
because it really does all just come down to function and value. Like AR glasses, Google Glass, years ago, kind of that was really mocked, and it not cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's not so much what we're seeing. Like, now with AR glasses, it's becoming a lot more mainstream, probably socially driven in part by the success of virtual reality for gaming. Kind of wearing headsets is becoming a little bit more common. And then
Mm-hmm.
crucially, the optics technology for augmented reality glasses means that actually they're quite useful. They're getting at a point where I've tried some out, and I can imagine thinking, yes, it would be great to have Google Maps overlaid over my eyes as I walk around a foreign city, or have a real-time translation, or I'd love to be able
Yes.
to interact with my phone and not have to look at my phone. That would be
Mm-hmm.
great. So I can see that the trend, and actually I think that's really important when it comes to kind of brain control interfacing and human machine interfacing, is the AR trend and the kind of quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote metaverse trend. Because if AR becomes more ubiquitous, then the next question is, well, how are we controlling it? How are we interacting with it? If the whole benefit
Mm-hmm.
is I don't want to be staring at my phone and clicking and having a handheld device, and there's so much I can do with tapping the side of my glasses or everything else. But if I want, a versatile way of interacting, then we're going to need something else. And is that going that space is still really open.
Mm-hmm.
That could it could really benefit from leveraging all of the EEG type stuff that's gone into hearables and neurotech, for actually now quite simple to start with, and then becoming more complex kind of
Mm-hmm.
computer control of AR glasses. And similarly, kind of Minority Report style gesture control from my watch. If I can click and point with my hand, and then I can give an element of neural feedback as well for eye tracking and all the rest. You can imagine this ecosystem where actually it is a little bit more cool to be
Mm-hmm.
wearing this stuff. But in the same vein, because a lot of that kind of gesture control, computer control is going for the mass market, is going to maybe be really kind of tied and correlated to trends in AR,
Mm-hmm.
then you're, if AR isn't a thing for whatever reason, if something else comes along or whatever, then what does that mean for all of that interfacing technology? Because then, if I'm not happy to be adopting something on my, on my head as a mass consumer, or wear something that doesn't look like earbuds, what function am I going to get that's going to persuade me to use it? So I think the interplay between all of the different form factors in the moment in terms of what's going to do what if we don't want to have just smartphone anymore is really interesting to watch how that's evolving.
Yeah, and also, I mean, always coming back to the data, I've always thought that being your own data scientist is something nobody wants to do.
Sure.
So getting to the point where we can have autonomy or have systems have some autonomy over the interpretation of the data and then taking actions on the user's behalf. I thought it was going to be a little bit further off, but now with a lot of the new generative AI tools coming out, new APIs, the ability to conceptualize what's happening for the user, human activity recognition, for example, and then feeding that context into generative, could be a large language model, could also be any other type of model built for sequential understanding of what's happening in the user state, where does the user want to go, taking away some of this burden of decision from people based on data, because at some point in the metaverse, wherever you have too much information coming in, you're limited by what you can interpret. So we have to have these systems working together, which also take over the interpretation. I mean, much the same way when we walk down the street, we have a ton of different things going on all throughout our body, muscle movement, balance, that we're not really cognizant of. We don't really think about, but it's happening to keep us from falling down. And when I think about the BCIs, the neurotechnologies that we can bring in, if it's in a form factor that is socially acceptable, like you say, and the headphone seems to be one of the best ways to do that, as opposed to the headband, then the question is like, okay, we characterize motion, we characterize, let's say, heart rate, maybe stress. Now we start to characterize something that's happening cognitively in the user, and then use that as a way to understand the person and how products and services can really change their behavior to personalize and to accommodate those unique user needs.
It's so interesting as well, because all of those concepts you're talking about are, it's that middle ground of high quality data that is not kind of necessarily the first thing that you would think of when you think about what am I going to do with EEG data, or what am I going to do with neural signals. There's a big camp talking about perhaps just sleep monitoring, or what's my, am I stressed? And then you've got the medical side, which is, okay, well, how are we going to kind of, diagnose this neurological condition in the lab with the highest, efficacy data? And then the middle ground that you've just talked about, which I have to admit was an area that I hadn't thought about in a huge amount of depth before, is this, as you're saying, kind of the load on the brain, and how is that going to change when we've got more data inputs and so forth, and how do we manage that, and what systems do we put in place to mitigate that, is somewhat standalone in the middle in terms of what accuracy you need. And something I think about a lot is, and questions I kind of still have are, if it's generally the case that with an implantable device you can get the higher sensitivity information, and with something non-invasive you're going to get something less sensitive, but with the right hardware engineering, the right software development, you can improve that. What are the functions that begin to become possible for non-invasive that would have previously only been implantable, and how far does that go? Is there going to be a limit to what we can get at non-invasively, or is it actually the case that 20 years from now, what we're thinking we can only get out with a chip in the brain, we're actually going to get out of an earphone? That's a question that I have, and it's an interesting future to imagine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have our non-invasive technologies such as EEG. We're doing biopotential at the scalp. We keep on wondering also, how other new sensing technologies,
Mm,
potentially ultrasound
yeah,
and also magnetic fields,
yeah.
could potentially also give some information going deeper into the brain. But we're still, yeah, it's the question about how to package that technology into
Mm,
a form factor, which is actually wearable and
yeah.
usable by people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that comes back to actually something I've been looking at in the quantum sensor space again, and these
Mm-hmm.
quantum magnetic field sensors, where
Mm.
the trend there is really the same. It's, you've got squids, superconducting quantum interference devices, and optically pumped magnetometers that at the moment have gone into, big MEG brain scanners, because
Mm-hmm.
all of the cooling infrastructure and, all of the components that you need that space to go into it. But there's there are companies out there saying, well, how can we make that into a helmet so that we can offer MEG to children, who want to,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be sat in a scanner for a long time, or we want to get at that information while someone's performing an activity and see how the brain responds during that activity.
Mm-hmm.
So that, the medical community is still on, is really looking more seriously at quantum sensors to make wearable, brain scanners. And obviously, the development that's still needed there to get them into from a scanner to a helmet is still significant. But if you can
Mm-hmm.
go from a scanner to a helmet, at what point do you go, okay, well, we've got a full helmet for medical diagnostic because I want all of these different points over the brain. But what if I just want to take that into a smaller form factor? What if I do just want a headband or something else? So I think it's exciting in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the accuracy and the sensitivities with non-invasive sensors in the future. I think is not something to be underestimated at all,
Mm-hmm.
and I think is exciting, and it is really exciting. And the potential of the implantable stuff to kind of have big impacts on certain patient demographics is really huge. But from a consumer space, I think I'm still slightly yet to be convinced that we'll all head off for an operation to get a chip put in our brain to control our phone. I think if we're talking about the social convention barrier of, wearing a funny looking headset versus, I'm going to, go and get something implanted just to have Apple Pay in my head, or, whatever, it is going to be, is slightly different. So, yeah, I think that what we can do non-invasively at the brain in the future could be seriously impressive.
Yeah, but many people don't have a problem spending, what, 20, 30,000 for plastic surgery.
It's true. It's very, very true.
But somehow putting a brain computer interface in is taboo.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, again, it's obviously it's the early stages of this stuff, and it'll be really interesting to see kind of how it evolves. I just think so much of, again, it comes back to what's the value of something wearable, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
just the sensing functionality that it offers by virtue of being there. It's the fact that it's continuous and that it's really efficient and easy to
Mm-hmm.
use and customizable, and you could and all of the rest. So I think there's going to be a space for wearables irrespective of what happens in the implantable space.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was also interesting what you said earlier about this idea, first trying to do everything at the wrist.
Mm,
I mean, I also worked on blood pressure monitors for a long time. Seems like
yeah,
someone's always trying to do blood pressure at the wrist.
yeah,
Hasn't really happened yet.
yeah,
Um, and then in the, let's say in the earbud space, then we're talking about also putting in heart rate sensor, motion
yeah,
sensor to the earbuds.
yeah.
Then people ask, okay, but if you can do it at the wrist, why do it at the ear?
Yes.
And I'm also wondering how you see this idea of having like distributed sensors over the body. Maybe they're
Mm.
measuring the same thing, not always at the same time, but you can have like hybrid continuous sensing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, on the blood pressure space, it comes for me back to the continuous and the convenience thing, because
Mm,
if you can do it at the wrist, but you still have to calibrate it regularly with a cuff,
mm.
then that's not, I've still got to buy a cuff. So,
Yeah.
I can still see, there are benefits. There will be people out there who it does benefit to have a solution with a calibration. But, the pursuit, I think it's Valencell who are trying to get this entirely calibration free solution. That could certainly, tick the box of being more convenient to use than some of the others right now.
Hmm.
In terms of why would I measure my heart rate in the ear if I can already do it at the watch? And I think the market kind of definitely told us that that was a problem, because there was this trend of, oh, yep, sports earbuds, and then didn't really have success. And I think it's the value that's missed there in the watch, is that I'm also seeing my data in real time. So I'm not just sensing at the wrist, I'm displaying at the wrist, and I'm communicating. So if I'm the type of athlete who wants to measure my heart rate and steps and everything else, I'm probably want to see my running time and see what my pace is doing. So I'm going to adopt a smartwatch because I need that. And then if I've got it at the wrist, I'll just have cheap earbuds, or, whatever I want. I'll focus on sound quality for my audio. I don't need to measure it twice, because it's not giving me anything new. If it's going to give me something new, I might adopt it. Like, I think Under Armour have now put out some running shoes with some motion sensors in, and that can add some value, because it can tell you something about your gait, which your watch maybe could do, but not to the same way. But I think competing with the fact that the wrist can both sense and display is very difficult, except for the AR glasses. And I think for me, that's why they're such a big competitor to be a space where you might want to integrate more stuff. If I'm going to integrate more sensors, it's probably going to be at something that's to do with AR, because I'm getting the display that I'm, that I would be missing at my watch if I didn't need it anymore. But in terms of kind of, quantified self, sensors everywhere, it comes back to why. What am I doing it for? I think as well, perhaps somewhat cynically, I have a feel that with a lot of the consumer market, they want quite a short-term win on their information. So they like doing their steps and their heart rate so much, because that's instantly telling me, today I did this many steps. It helps me manage my lifestyle. It helps me manage my weight. I get better at running. I can share all my data, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the stuff that's exciting about the future in kind of the sensing space is using, more wearable sensor information to do things like predictive medicine. And over a long term, I can make some really personalized insights into my health. But that's quite a long term win to be motivated to wear all of this stuff. So what am I getting in the short term that means I'm going to then benefit from all the data collection long term? Because it's a slightly unrelated, but another sensor technology I write about is gas sensor technology. And I see it kind of the same there. So air quality obviously hugely impacts our health. We should be really worried about it. It's such a big problem. But how many of us are actually continuously monitoring our air quality in our homes? How many are actually investing in those solutions that exist? And I have one of my arguments is that some of the reason that consumer market is slightly limited is because there's no short-term win to the information necessarily. Like, I know that it's going to, in fact, impact my lung health long term. I should be optimizing my air quality, but I don't get that quick win today of here's the data. And I think that can be a challenge. And I don't necessarily mean there aren't ways around achieving that. I think there are. I just think that consumers have to be handed that easy win. They're not going to come up with it on their own. So there's a big burden on companies to come up with systems, apps, solutions, whatever it might be that, put that in front of them.
Yeah, that reminds me. I was talking to a guy a couple of years ago in a startup accelerator, and we were talking about the idea of like the CO2 content in the air, then impacting like your cognition and decision-making abilities in a meeting. So if you see the CO2 is too high, then you have to open a window and then you can refresh your mind.
Yep.
But then we also have like these whole ecosystem products. I mean, in the smart home, your smart air purifier is now quite popular.
Yeah. So I think integrated into a purifier is great because you're solving the problem, and it's an actionable insight. Something, a wearable trend that is also in the gas sensor space is you want an actionable insight.
Well, it's also autonomous. I mean, if my air filter senses as there are particles in the air, then like it kicks up its airflow.
Yeah. And similarly,
short-term cleaning.
In schools and offices who want smart HVAC, that's great. I can have a ventilation system that's closing the loop with all of these sensors and everything else. But if I'm just in my, flat or my house, and it's my ventilation optimization is, do I open the window or not? And that's probably going to be more driven by what's the temperature outside, and can I afford to open the window right now? And is it noisy? I'm probably not going to start changing my patterns of opening and closing the window based on my sensor information, even though I probably, I would benefit from it. There is a win for me there. It's just, because it's not autonomous, because it's, there's no short-term win. It's not as an easy sell. And I think there are some mirrors there with some of the wearable sensor stuff where it's like long term, it could be fantastic to collect all of this data, but how am I going to use it today? And similarly, are the people that could use it today prepped to use it? There are some clinicians you speak to, for example, that think, I don't want continuous streams of data about my patient. Like, that's not how we like to triage. I don't have the tools to manage it all. I don't want to start, looking for things that aren't there. It kind of, a lot of the use of continuous data as a diagnostic is actually not well embedded into how a lot of medical professionals like to work. So, there's a lot of kind of stakeholders in the game that need to kind of come together and decide what's the best way of doing this stuff and how can we make the best of it.
Yeah, but it goes back to this idea of not needing to make a decision, that we can have autonomous systems doing it for us.
Yeah.
So like long term, if you see that your sleep quality or your cognitive performance during the day is related to your sleep quality, then you can automatically start to take some actions. But you have to understand the context. I mean, this is the whole thing. If there's just data, there's not understanding. If there's not understanding, there's no action a person can really take.
Yeah.
I'm really interested, essentially in line with what you just said, how we can have those long-term insights, but then are actually giving us something actionable or leading automatically to changes in our lifestyle. Like, if I'm sleeping poorly, my calendar should automatically try and optimize itself. Push meetings to the end of the day. So I think there's a lot of interoperability issues, which ideally are solved through easy API access, but you still need someone to actually sit down and then design how those systems would be interacting with one another. Or I guess theoretically an AI could do it if we leave all the small decisions to AIs in the future to automatically find the best solution for us. And we find those solutions by collating data over hundreds, millions of people. Yeah, super interesting question, how to approach that.
Yeah, and I think I wonder whether there are ways that there's maybe a middle ground of showing short-term value that doesn't depend on some ubiquitous ideological system. Could it be something like, I think, like a kind of with the IDEN technology and the idea that you can start to link your daily life to your sleeping life, for an example, which is something that's been disjointed before. It's valuable, and then you can start connecting kind of your choices to things like your sleep or your emotional health. Could you have something that, as you said, something like calendar optimization, but something like, if it's more integrated in my smart home, does my lighting in my rooming in my room react to my mood or the sleep that I need? Does a little bit like what they're trying to do with cars as well, actually, in time to have cars reacting to emotional state. Should I have my radio be a bit louder or a bit quieter? Should I have my smart fridge of the future recommend this particular meal to me because it's got better nutritional value? Should I have a haptic suggestion on to call my mom or call a friend? Kind of are there ways that we can kind of make it have value that doesn't have to be so kind of, I think really it's smart home, essentially. It's smart home, I think, is where that shorter term opportunity is, because that's where we spend so much of our time sleeping and living. So simple stuff like the lighting, the volume of the TV, what films should I watch tonight, what radio channel should I listen to, could all be stuff that is, at the moment, we get suggestions based on algorithms, and no one really likes them, and maybe that's not true, but they have scope to be better.
Well, they're very narrow still. I mean, I was talking about this recently in Tokyo, that we can when we can connect up brain computer interfaces to these recommendation engines, we can give a better personalization layer.
Yeah.
Because still it's just based on minute interactions on the platforms, but we're not really, again, really understanding, pulling in the context of the user.
Yeah.
So it's really such a shame that we have all this data, but we look at individual parts of the user like in some very narrow focused ways, so that we don't have really the holistic view of how all these things are changing and adapting. Huh.
Yeah. And it's like we have I think there's an example of someone made a film that reacts to neural information. You see a different plot based on how you're feeling about the movie. And I did another podcast talking about the future of podcasts. And they were saying, well, could audio content in the future be, the story that you're listening to, or the podcast, the next song you listen to can adapt to your mood instead of, shuffle or whatever. So
I mean, I would definitely say yes. I mean, this is also what we're thinking, is that you want to have like a balance between or let's say original artistic intent and adaptability to people's individual needs.
Yeah.
But with generative audio, generative video, I mean, the real-time aspect will be there.
Yeah.
And so like these ideas of having adaptable games, adaptable media have been there for a long time. It's just the technology was never actually there to enable it. But I think we're getting pretty close to it being a reality.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think you can certainly imagine kind of how much kind of gaming could be augmented with that kind of information. I kind of wonder already why there isn't, or maybe there are and I just don't know, kind of where is the game that has my heart rate integrated into it already? Like that should be that. You'd think that'd be an easy win. But yeah, I think it's emotional state kind of integration into our kind of consumer devices, I think is super exciting.
But I also wonder if we're doing like generative media experiences, what does that mean for society? Because right now we still have a lot of glue in society, which is based around, let's say, shared experiences. So shared storytelling that we've had, from certain cultures. Grow up, they help to focus, or like the storytelling structure can be used as a model for how we imagine our lives are going to be. If millions of people think back to a particular type of music at a particular point in the evolution of whatever, it could be like the Beatles, it could be other music movements. Those like bring a lot of people together. And then if you don't have like one single type of media, but it's an adaptive media, I wonder how that changes also the identity of generations going forward. It's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and you kind of see it to an extent a little bit already with this, with music and films and so on. There's already there's kind of a generative gap between we like this and we don't, and it can feel a little bit like those gaps are getting slightly shorter because the pace at which kind of trends change are so rapid now. You used to talk about a decade in music, and now maybe you talk about a particular year in music, and then how's that going to change? And I hadn't thought about how that impacts society. Super interesting.
Yeah, I think we're going to an amazing future to see what's going to happen in the world. And you're helping to guide us, so thank you very much for that.
Oh, no problem. It's a pleasure. It's been a lovely conversation.
Yeah, for me as well. Any last thoughts you have about future of sensors, the quantum bursts in your brain?
I don't think so. I think my only thought is that I hope that the potential of this technology to offer us, the more immersive experience is realized, and it doesn't go too far down, the Black Mirror alternative of 1984 style themes and all of those concerns, because I think the potential it has to give us more immersion and kind of slightly more allow us to live in the moment more, essentially, I think is the philosophical way of thinking about it. Like I have a personal dislike for my relationship with my phone that I think a lot of people share, and I hope that this this incredible sensing technology that's coming out can help to solve that particular problem for society, as opposed to create something more scary.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we like to scare one another about the future, like
Mm,
everything about AI taking over. People are worried about the Terminator effect. And I
yeah.
always think, if I logically think through building an AI, we teach it empathy.
Mm,
Like, why would it try and take over the world and kill all the humans? It doesn't make any sense. But I guess it kind of goes back to the story structures we've had for hundreds of
yeah.
years.
Yeah.
We want to scare kids with fairy tales so they don't accidentally get lost in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do that on a large population scale with new technologies.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So let's build a future that isn't so scary for everybody.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, thanks, Tess. It's really awesome to have you on the podcast. Look
No,
forward to
pleasure.
some future conversations in the future as well and following your work.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you, everyone in the metaverse, in the YouTube, or wherever you're watching us. Looking forward to next conversations and new podcasts in the future. But from Switzerland and from Cambridge, adieu.